The chemo drip had left a poison metal taste in my mouth that no amount of water could wash away. My body felt like a battery, drained to zero. I paid the Uber driver, my hands fumbling, and almost fell just walking up the 2 steps to my own front door. I had to lean my head against the wood, a wave of nausea washing over me. I finally got the key in the lock and pushed the door open, desperate for my bed. That's when I heard it. A man's voice, my husband Bryant, and a woman's. A light, happy giggle that was definitely not mine. They were in the living room. I shuffled in, my chemo bag sliding off my shoulder. Bryant was standing by the fireplace, smiling at a younger woman. She was pointing at my grandmother's bookshelf. And this whole wall, the woman said, we can just take it out to create an open concept. She saw me. Bryant saw me. His smile didn't falter. It just changed. It went from warm to the cold, flat smile he used in board meetings. Adelia, darling. Good, you're back, he said, his voice chillingly calm. Verity is moving in. We've decided our relationship has become redundant. My name is Adelia. I'm 42 years old and a data scientist. And that was the moment my husband, in his HR manager voice, restructured me out of my own life. I stood there, swaying slightly. The silence in the room was deafening. Verity, his mistress, looked at me with a small, pitying smile. It was the kind of look you give a stray dog, just before you call animal control. She expected me to scream, to cry, to throw something. Brian expected it, too. He braced himself, his hands clasped behind his back in his authoritative stance. They were ready for a hysterical, dying woman. They weren't ready for the truth. The truth was, the chemo and the shock had formed a shield of ice inside me. I felt nothing, just a vast, cold emptiness. I looked at the wall she wanted to tear down. I looked at Brian's smug face, and I just nodded once. I see, I whispered. My voice was a dry rustle. Without another word, I turned and walked, step by agonizing step, down the hall to the guest room. I closed the door and heard the quiet, satisfying click of the lock. I heard them whispering in the hall. That was easy, Verity said. Bryant's laugh was low. See, too sick to even fight. I sank onto the guest bed, my body trembling. But I wasn't reaching for tissues. I was reaching for my chemo bag. I pulled out my laptop, and my fingers, though numb, typed in the password. I opened the hidden file, Project Phoenix Financial Anomaly Report. As the file opened, my life's work stared back at me. I wasn't just a partner in Pinpoint, our data analytics company. I was its creator. I founded it with the $2 million inheritance my grandmother left me. My algorithms, my code, were the engine. Bryant, he was the shiny paint. I met him when he was a slick salesman, and I was a coder. I fell for his charm. When we launched the company, I made him head of HR, thinking his people skills would be an asset. He loved the title, loved walking the floor, loved the idea of being a boss. But he never understood the work. He never understood the data. Then, 8 months ago, I got the diagnosis. Breast cancer. The very day I was in the oncologist's office, terrified, was the day he must have started planning this. He saw my sickness not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. He thought my chemo fog would make me stupid. He forgot that I built the entire system. I built the logs, the backups, and the secret mirrored databases. He thought he was the boss, but he was just a user. And I was the admin. The next morning, I woke up stiff and aching on the lumpy guest mattress. A sliver of light under the door was blocked. Someone was standing there. Then, 2 envelopes slid across the hardwood floor. Bryant. Adelia, he called through the door, his voice sickeningly reasonable. I've left the papers. I'm being fair. I stared at the envelopes. One was thick, divorce papers. The other was thin and, I saw with a jolt, laminated. Laminated. It was a relocation package. Inside, I knew, would be listings for small, furnished apartments. You can keep the house, he continued, his voice muffled. But you'll have to take over the new mortgage payments. A new mortgage? My blood turned to ice. He'd mortgaged our house, my house, from under me? I'll just take the company, he said, so casually. Let's be honest, you're too sick to manage it anyway. It's for the best. We'll call it a clean break. He was firing me. He was firing me from our marriage, from my company, and from my home, all in one clean corporate memo. A cold, hard anger, stronger than the chemo, flooded my veins. He had no idea what he had just done. I didn't touch the papers. They were a symptom, not the disease. The disease was Bryant, and I was about to cut him out. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady. My first call was to my personal lawyer, Arthur, the sharpest financial litigator in the state, whom I had quietly put on retainer 3 months ago. Arthur, I said, my voice low. It's Adelia. It's time. Begin the process. I didn't need to say more. He knew exactly what to do. Yes, everything we discussed. He's in the house. My second call was to Marcus. He was a junior data analyst, a genius kid I'd found in the IT department and mentored personally. He was loyal to the work, not to the boss. Marcus, I said. He picked up on the first ring. I knew you'd be calling, he said. Good, I said. Do you remember the protocol we talked about? Ghost protocol, he said, his voice alive with energy. I'm ready. Run it, I said. Run a deep dive audit on all executive level discretionary spending. I want every new vendor, every recurring payment for the last 14 months. I want it all. Running it now, Marcus replied. Consider it done. I hung up. The chemo fog in my head was gone. It was replaced by absolute, cold, sharp clarity. The trap was set. I stayed locked in the guest room, which was fast becoming my command center. I could hear them in the kitchen. Bryant's voice was loud, full of fake confidence. He was boasting to Verity. It's all about synergy, babe, he said. The old way is just inefficient. Now that I have full control, I can finally streamline everything. I knew exactly what streamline meant. It meant moving my money. I pictured him at the kitchen island, his expensive laptop open, probably trying to approve another fake invoice from Verity's shell company. I almost smiled. I was just waiting. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Showtime. Right on cue. I heard a heavy thud from the kitchen, as if Bryant had slammed his fist on the counter. What the hell, he yelled. I heard his chair scrape back. Access denied? What does that mean, access denied? His smooth, charismatic voice was gone, replaced by a high-pitched panic. I heard him stomping down the hall, then his muffled, furious voice. He was on the phone, no doubt calling Marcus. What did you do to my dashboard? He screamed. I pressed my ear to the door. Sorry, Bryant. I heard Marcus's voice, perfectly calm. All executive financial accounts are temporarily frozen. A ghost protocol audit was just initiated. It looks like Adelia ordered it. It's system-wide. The silence that followed was the best medicine I'd had all day. While Bryant and Verity were in the house, trapped with their anger, I slipped out. The chemo made me tired, but this new mission gave me a strange energy. I took an Uber to Arthur's, my lawyer's, office. I clutched my laptop bag like it was a lifeline. Arthur met me in a polished conference room, his face kind, but all business. Adelia, he said, you look pale. Are you sure you're up for this? I'm fine, Arthur, I said. My voice was stronger than I expected. Let's get to work. I didn't need his pity, I needed his skill. I connected my laptop to the large screen on the wall. Project Phoenix, I said. I opened the dashboard, not the one Bryant saw, but my private, mirrored log that had been copying every single transaction. He's been siphoning funds for 14 months, I said, pointing to a transaction dated the day after my first chemo treatment. He created a shell company, Viridian Solutions, billing for Synergy Consulting Services. Arthur looked up, his pen pausing. Viridian for Verity? Precisely, I said. I typed one final command, and a single number appeared on the screen, down to the last cent, the total, Arthur. $5,214,800. Arthur stared, then a slow, grim smile spread across his face. I've got every transaction, every inflated invoice, and every wire transfer. It's all logged. I was back in the guest room, sipping weak tea, when the doorbell rang. I heard Bryant's annoyed, I'm coming, followed by a muffled, professional voice. A moment of pure silence. Then, Bryant's voice, tight with disbelief. I'm not signing anything. Get off my property. The process server must have done his job because I heard the thud of a heavy envelope hitting the tile floor of the entryway. I heard Verity's high-pitched voice. Bryant? What is it? What does that say? I heard the sound of paper tearing. A sharp gasp from Verity. A federal lawsuit? For $5 million? Bryant, it has my name on it. The shouting started then, a beautiful symphony of panic and blame. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Bryant. I didn't even have to read it to know what it said. I took a screenshot before my eyes even scanned the words. You pathetic, vengeful bee. You'll never prove this. I'll destroy you in court, financially and personally. You're just a bitter, dying woman. A bitter, dying woman. I smiled, feeling more alive than I had in months. I forwarded the screenshot to Arthur with one line, Exhibit A. Please add it to the file. Arthur, my lawyer, moved like a shark. Because of my health, the court agreed to fast-track the depositions. I didn't have to be there. I watched the video feed from the safety of my guest room, my laptop propped up on a pillow. Verity walked in, not in her yoga pants, but in an expensive-looking white suit. She looked less like a businesswoman and more like a child playing dress-up. She was smug, condescending. I am a legitimate synergy consultant, she said, crossing her legs and flicking her hair. My services are invaluable to the company. Arthur just nodded, adjusting his glasses. Indeed, he said, his voice polite. And what are your qualifications for this? Synergy consulting? Verity scoffed. My vast experience in, corporate synergy. I have a unique understanding of the market. I see, Arthur said, opening a file. We subpoenaed your actual employment history. It appears you were a barista at a coffee shop in the mall until 6 months ago. Verity's smug smile froze. And after that, Arthur continued, you were unemployed. We also checked with 3 universities. None of them seemed to offer a synergy degree. So I asked again, what are your qualifications? Verity's face, under all the makeup, was as white as her suit. She didn't have an answer. Verity's deposition was a good start, but it only proved she was a fool. I needed to prove Bryant was a monster. I needed the smoking gun. While Bryant and Verity were out, probably trying to find a lawyer who would take their case, I stayed in the guest room and went to work. I had a secure, encrypted drive, a digital vault I had built years ago. It contained copies of everything, including server archives that Bryant, in his HR role, thought he had permanently deleted. He was good at firing people. He was terrible at data security. I started digging, running searches for emails between his personal account and Verity's. It took 3 hours, my head pounding from the chemo, but then I found it. My heart stopped. The subject line was Redundant Assets Management. It was dated 8 months ago, 3 days after my cancer diagnosis. My hand shook as I opened it. It was from Bryant to Verity. Once Adelia is permanently indisposed, he wrote, our synergy firm will fully absorb her company. Just keep processing the invoices, babe. She's too sick and distracted by the chemo to ever notice these trivial expenses. Permanently indisposed. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was waiting for me to die. I saved the email, my blood running colder than ice. I sent the redundant assets email to Arthur with a simple note, the smoking gun. I knew what he had to do. He called me back an hour later, his voice sharp and energized. The judge has seen it, he said. He was appalled. The words permanently indisposed in reference to a spouse undergoing chemo did not sit well with him. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction. The emergency hearing was 5 minutes long. Adelia, Arthur continued. He signed the order. It's done. It was a full asset freeze. Not just the company accounts Bryant was already locked out of, but everything. His personal bank accounts. Verity's bank accounts. The luxury sports car he bought himself last month with my money. The new designer wardrobe he'd bought for her. Even the joint travel funds he was probably planning to use to escape. All of it frozen. In one clean move, the judge had turned off their water. They were still in my house, but as of right now, they couldn't even afford to buy groceries. They just didn't know it yet. I thought the redundant assets email was the worst of it. I thought I had seen the full picture of his greed. I was wrong. Marcus, my trusted analyst, called me late that night. He sounded nervous, almost scared. Adelia, he whispered, I found something else. It's worse than the money. My stomach tightened. What is it, Marcus? When Bryant first ordered the ghost protocol audit, he thought I was on his side, Marcus explained, his words coming fast. He ordered me to build a backdoor into your proprietary algorithms. He was planning to steal your entire intellectual property, Adelia. All your code, all your dashboards. I couldn't breathe. That was my life's work. He was going to delete the originals from the Pinpoint servers, Marcus said, his voice shaking with anger. And then he was going to relaunch the entire thing as his own company, as Viridian Solutions. He wasn't just stealing from you, Adelia. He was planning to erase you. Marcus sent me the files, the hidden code, the project outlines, the entire plan. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was an execution. The asset freeze hit them like a physical blow. The first sign was when I heard Verity screaming at Bryant about her credit card being declined. The second was a frantic, sobbing voicemail she left on my lawyer's office line. Arthur played it for me over the phone. It was all him. Verity shrieked, the audio quality terrible, thick with tears and panic. He told me it was his money. He said she was dying and that it was just creative accounting to protect the assets. I didn't know. He manipulated me. She was a rat trying to find the first escape hatch on a ship that wasn't even sinking yet. It was being seized. He promised me a share of the company once Adelia was out of the picture, she cried. I'll testify. I'll tell you everything. Just please, don't let me go to jail. I can't go to jail. Arthur just listened. When the voicemail ended, he was silent for a beat. Well, he said dryly, it appears their synergy has been disrupted. Her meltdown was pathetic. It didn't make me feel pity. It just made me feel tired. She was weak and he was cruel. They deserved each other. Bryant, it turned out, was completely unaware that his new partner had already flipped on him. He was still living in his own reality, a reality where he was the star. He did the one thing a narcissist always does when cornered. He tried to control the story. My friend from my cancer support group texted me, Adelia, turn on channel 5. Now, I fumbled with the guest room remote. There he was, Bryant, sitting in a borrowed office, looking haggard and heartbroken. He was faking tears. I've been grieving for my wife for months, he said, his voice cracking. Her health, it's been deteriorating and it's made her irrational. Erratic. The reporter nodded, her face full of fake sympathy. And these financial attacks, she asked. I don't know what to say, Bryant said, wiping a dry eye. I've been driven to find comfort elsewhere. I'm only human. But I never, ever thought she would become so vindictive. He was using my cancer. He was using my sickness, my fight for life, as a shield for his theft. A hot, pure rage, unlike anything I had ever felt, burned away the last of my chemo fog. I called Arthur immediately. I could barely speak. I was so angry. Did you see it? I whispered. Channel 5. I saw it, Arthur said, his voice a flat, cold line. He just handed us the rope. Fix it, I said. He can't say that about me. Adelia, Arthur said. He's just made the biggest mistake of his life. I already have. That night, on the 6 p.m. news, the same anchor from the morning segment looked gravely into the camera. An update on the shocking story of a local CEO, she said. This morning, Bryant, CEO of Pinpoint, claimed his wife's irrational behavior was behind a recent lawsuit. The screen split. On one side, Bryant dabbing his fake tears. On the other, a high-resolution scan of an email. Tonight, the anchor said, her voice dripping with contempt. Our station received this anonymous email. It is from Bryant to his mistress Verity, dated just after his wife's diagnosis. She read it aloud. Once Adelia is permanently indisposed, our synergy firm will fully absorb her company. She's too sick and distracted by the chemo to ever notice. The anchor looked back at the camera. The story, it seems, is very different from what Mr. Bryant told us this morning. The news report about the redundant assets email was a bomb. It exploded in our small corporate world. The two independent board members of Pinpoint, Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Vance, were furious. They were old school, honorable people I had chosen for their integrity. They saw the news story and the leaked email, and an emergency board meeting was called the very next morning. I attended by video call from the guest room, my camera on. My face was pale from my last treatment, but my eyes were hard. I refused to look like a victim. Bryant showed up in person, still arrogant, trying to use his HR spin. He called the email a misunderstanding, taken out of context. He tried to manage the narrative, talking about company optics and unfortunate wording. Mrs. Vance, a woman I'd always admired, cut him off. Mr. Bryant, your actions are not a narrative. They are a disgrace. The vote was swift. All in favor of removing Bryant from all positions at this company, effective immediately. 3 hands went up. Mine, Mr. Harrison's, and Mrs. Vance's. I watched his face crumple on the video feed. The vote is unanimous, Mr. Harrison said, and all in favor of appointing Adelia as interim CEO. 3 hands again. Just like that, Bryant was nothing. I clicked leave meeting and let out a breath I'd been holding for months. Bryant was no longer CEO, but he was still a squatter in my house. He and Verity were still there, probably trying to figure out their next move. Their assets completely frozen. While they were out, likely at some cut-rate lawyer's office, begging for help, I made my move. I called a locksmith. In 20 minutes, every lock on my house was changed. I then hired a removal service. I had them go into the master bedroom, pack up every one of Bryant's expensive suits and Verity's new designer clothes, and put them in cheap cardboard boxes. I told them to put the boxes on the front lawn, right by the curb. Verity's yoga mat went right on top. When Bryant's car pulled up later that afternoon, I watched from the guest room window. The confusion on his face when his key didn't work was priceless. Then he saw the boxes. He started kicking them, screaming. Verity just sat on the curb and cried. As if on cue, a process server hired by Arthur walked right up and handed them the papers. "This is an eviction notice and a restraining order," the server said loudly. My next-door neighbor's security camera caught the entire thing. His teenage son posted the video online. By morning, CEO kicked out on lawn had 500,000 views. Bryant and Verity were homeless, broke, and now a viral humiliation. But I wasn't done. The civil lawsuit was just about getting my money back. The criminal part was next. The viral video and the news story about the redundant assets email had done their job. They had gotten the attention of people much more powerful than a local news anchor. Arthur called me. "Adelia," he said, and his voice was heavy. "The U.S. Attorney's Office just called me. They've seen everything. It wasn't just the $5.2 million in embezzlement anymore. It was the evidence from Marcus about the attempted intellectual property theft. It was the permanently indisposed email, which showed a clear conspiracy to a jury. It was the wire fraud, moving my money across state lines to Verity's fake company. This was no longer a messy divorce. This was a federal case. I had to sit down. Part of me was terrified. This was bigger than I ever imagined. But another, stronger part of me felt a grim, iron resolve. He had waited for me to die. A full-blown criminal investigation was being launched against both Bryant and Verity. They were being investigated for wire fraud, conspiracy, and grand larceny. They weren't just going to be broke. They were going to be prisoners. The criminal investigation meant that Bryant and Verity's assets weren't just frozen. They were now seized as evidence by the federal government. They had no money, no income, and no way to get money. But they desperately needed lawyers, not just any lawyers, but expensive criminal defense lawyers. They were in a trap of their own making. I heard through the grapevine that Bryant tried to borrow money from his family. After seeing the email and the viral video of him screaming on my lawn, his own mother hung up on him. Verity's parents apparently told her she made her bed. They were completely, totally alone. 6 weeks later, the inevitable happened. Arthur called me with the news. They both filed, he said. Personal bankruptcy. The news sent a shiver of relief through me. They had nothing left. The civil court, seeing their bankruptcy and their refusal to respond, entered a default judgment in my favor. They officially, legally owed me the full $5,214,800. It was a debt that, even after bankruptcy, would follow them for the rest of their lives. They had tried to take everything from me, and in the end, they were the ones left with absolute zero. The same week their bankruptcy was finalized, I got my own news. I was sitting in my oncologist's office, my hands clenched, expecting the worst. He looked at my chart, then at me, and for the first time in a year, he smiled. "Adelia," he said, "your scans are clear. The margins are clean. You are in remission." I cried for the first time in 8 months. But these were not tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of pure, unbridled life. The next Monday, I walked back into the offices of Pinpoint. I wore a bright red dress, not my old, quiet grays. My hair was short, soft, and curly. The chemo curls everyone talked about. It was a badge of honor. I wasn't the sick, broken woman in the guest room. As I walked onto the main floor, someone saw me. Then someone else. One person started clapping. Then the whole office rose to their feet. A wave of applause that echoed off the glass walls. I just nodded, my eyes shining, and walked to the CEO's office. The name Bryant was still on the frosted glass. I took my new ID badge and scraped the letters off myself. My company was back. I was back. The criminal trials were set. Verity, true to her word, had flipped completely. She was the prosecution's star witness, and her plea deal depended on it. I had to go to the courthouse to watch her testify. She sat in the witness box, her expensive-looking suit replaced by a cheap gray dress. She was crying, but they weren't the fake tears from her deposition. These were the terrified, ugly tears of someone who had lost everything. She looked small. She told the court everything. How Brian had approached her at the coffee shop, how he'd flattered her, how he'd promised her a life of luxury. She admitted he'd told her to set up the shell company, Viridian Solutions, and exactly how to bill the invoices. He said she was permanently indisposed and that we were just protecting his assets, she sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at Bryant. In exchange for her testimony, the judge showed her some mercy. She wasn't sentenced to prison. She received a suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, and a court order to pay restitution. She would be paying a portion of her tiny salary for the rest of her life, haunted by the legal debt she could never escape. That was her real prison. Bryant's trial was next. With Verity's testimony, he didn't stand a chance. He had no one left to betray, no one to manipulate. He sat at the defense table, his once charismatic face looking gray and empty. His charm, the one thing he'd always relied on, was gone. He was just a hollow man in a cheap suit. My testimony was clinical. I didn't cry. I simply presented the data. I showed the jury Project Phoenix, the dashboard I had built, showing the flow of money. I showed them the redundant assets email. I showed them Marcus's report on the attempted IP theft. The jury was out for only 2 hours. They came back with a verdict on all counts. Guilty. 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 At his sentencing, Bryant finally tried to speak, to use that smooth HR voice one last time, but it cracked. The judge was not impressed. He called Bryant's actions monstrous and parasitic. Then he delivered the sentence, 8 years in federal prison. The man who had called our marriage redundant and my life's work trivial was now just a number in a system. His future had been permanently restructured. It was over. The trials were done. The company was mine, but it felt tainted. The lawyers had managed to recover about $3.5 million of the stolen money from various accounts. The rest, Verity and Bryant had already spent on cars, trips, and designer junk. The board members, Harrison and Vance, asked me what I wanted to do with the recovered funds. I could have taken it all as a bonus, a repayment for my pain. But I kept thinking about Bryant's words. Too sick. Permanently indisposed. He had used my cancer as his weapon. I decided, right then, that I would turn his weapon into a shield for others. I took $1 million of that recovered money, and with the board's tearful approval, I established the Phoenix Fund at Pinpoint. It was a new, permanent resource for any employee or their family member battling a serious illness. It would cover medical bills, travel, childcare, whatever they needed. It ensured that no one at my company would ever again have to choose between their health and their job. Bryant's cruelty would now fund other people's healing. That was my true revenge. A year went by. It was a year of hard work, of late nights, and of rebuilding, not just the company, but myself. My hair grew back, thick and curly. My body grew strong. My oncologist at my 1-year checkup gave me the words I'd been dreaming of. You are still and will remain clear. Go live your life, Adelia. I did. That same afternoon, I walked into a boardroom and with Marcus at my side, signed the biggest deal in Pinpoint's history, a groundbreaking $75 million contract. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. The old, toxic parts of the company were gone, replaced by loyalty and innovation. A few weeks later, my assistant placed a magazine on my desk. My hand shook. It was Wired magazine, and I was on the cover, in the red dress I'd worn back to the office, smiling. The headline in bold white letters read, "The data scientist who outsmarted her own betrayal." I wasn't the sick woman in the guest room. I wasn't the victim. I was the data queen. I sold the house. I couldn't stand the memories. I bought a new penthouse apartment, high above the city, with walls made of glass. It was all clean lines and bright light. I was standing on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, sipping a cup of hot green tea and watching the sunrise paint the sky. My phone buzzed on the table. It was an email forwarded from a secure prison terminal. My heart didn't even beat faster. I just felt tired. It was from Bryant. His name, a name I hadn't seen in over a year, looked strange on my screen. I opened it. He was begging. He wrote about systemic injustice in the prison system. He said he had made a mistake and found God. He said he still loved me and asked me to help with his appeal. I stared at the words. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just nothing. He was just a bad piece of data. I opened my personal analytics dashboard, the one I used to organize my new life. I created a new filter. The parameters were Bryant, Verity, and Viridian. The command was simple. Delete forever. I pressed the button. I blocked the sender. I put my phone down, picked up my tea, and watched the sun, bright and brilliant, climb over my city.